Welcome to Walking and Working Surfaces. This learning unit covers the new requirements as part of 29 CFR 1910 Subpart D, the Occupational Safety and Health Standards. After completion of this learning unit, you'll be able to define and identify walking and working surfaces within your facilities that are within and outside of OSHA compliance. You'll be able to develop solutions to avoid injury by putting in place different control methods for aisleways, stairways, guardrail systems, and fall protection systems. Before we begin the learning unit, I'd like to introduce myself to you. My name is Teresa Stack, and I have a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Connecticut in Natural Resource Management and Engineering, as well as a Master of Science degree from the University of Washington in Occupational and Environmental Health. I'm currently pursuing a doctoral degree from the University of Montana. I am a certified professional ergonomist and a certified safety professional. I recently published a text, Occupational Ergonomics, a Practical Approach, through Wiley. My professional experience: currently I am an associate professor at Montana Tech of the University of Montana in the Safety, Health, and Industrial Hygiene program. Before that, from 1999 to 2013, I was the senior occupational ergonomist in support of the Department of the Navy. I have also worked for the Idaho National and Environmental Laboratory in Idaho Falls, Idaho, and was a field technician responsible for cleaning up chemical and oil spills in the environment in Connecticut. We will cover the different parts of the standard. There are 10 parts of this standard, which include general requirements for all walking and working surfaces, and this is considered a horizontal part of the standard, as well as the vertical part of the standard, which covers specific walking and working surfaces: ladders, step bolts and manhole steps, stairways, dock boards, scaffolding, and roof descent systems. In a lesser degree, we'll talk about the requirements for your duty to provide fall protection equipment, fall protection systems, and training requirements for fall protection systems. This is not covered in great detail within this area, and therefore you should seek more information in the standard or a different learning environment, learning unit, if this is a requirement for you. So what's the data as related to walking and working surfaces? Why do you believe this will be a concern within your workplace? Well, there were 800 fatalities related to walking and working surfaces in 2015. 16% of them were from slips, trips, and falls, and of those 800, 81% of them were falls to lower levels. So there were 16% of the fatalities related to slips, trips, and falls in 2015. As far as injuries go, 33% of all injuries experienced by people in the workplace were related to slips, trips, and falls. It is the number 2 way in which people get hurt in the workplace. And again, 80% of those injuries were related to falls to lower levels. So why do people fall? Well, people fall for many reasons, but the scientific background behind why people fall is when their center of gravity moves outside of their envelope stance. So when your CG is either too far forward or too far back, you fall. You slip typically because of a mismatch between your shoe and the flooring surface, or when you switch from a high to a low coefficient of friction. So going from a rug to a wet floor would be a reason why people would slip, or the reason why people trip is going from a low coefficient of friction, like a wet floor, onto a high coefficient of friction, like a carpeted area. Also, wet surfaces tend to be slippery, and people trip over things that protrude out into the walkway. So we fall because our center of gravity is not within our stance. We slip and trip because of changes in the coefficient of friction. So the scope of 1910 subpart D covers general industry. This is all places in which people walk or work. If you're part of a construction site, that would be 1910-26, so the requirements are not here, as well as maritime is covered under a different occupational safety and health standard. So all other areas, factories, office buildings, hospital environments, schools, they're covered under general industry. And this particular subpart D covers workplaces where walking and working surfaces are both horizontal and vertical, such as stairways, steps, roofs, ladders, ramps, walkways, aisleways, or step boats. Walking and working surface means a horizontal or a vertical surface on or through which an employee walks, works, or gains access to a working location. Another definition that is important is an unprotected side or edge. That's a walking and working surface where there is no wall, guardrail, stairwell, or other type of system in place to protect an employee from falling to a lower level. And this picture is an example where there is no guardrail or balcony in place to protect an employee from falling to a lower level. That's the definition of an unprotected edge. So now that we've finished our definitions, let's get into the specific general requirements which cover all places of employment in which walking and working surfaces are found. So all places of employment, passageways, storerooms, should be kept clean, orderly, and in a sanitary condition. It also states that where there's wet processes, they should be drained and maintained. You can use a false floor, a mat, or an elevated platform so that people are not standing in water. This picture is an example where a mat is used to keep the walking surface dry, or at least keep the walking surface upon which people will walk on dry, and how sometimes it's difficult to put a cart into place where you have a mat because carts don't cross really well over matted surfaces. A new rule under subpart D, that's 1910.22, states that walking and working surfaces are maintained free of hazards such as sharp protrusions, objects, loose floorboards, nails, splinters, loose tiles, and that is of course so that people don't trip. So are these proper walking and working conditions? Well, our loading dock here, you can see that people cannot actually climb up the stairs to the loading dock. Folks were actually jumping off of the loading dock. The stairs aren't clean and they're also blocked. In this picture, we have a box in the way that prevents you from being able to exit. So this would not only be a violation of subpart D, walking and working surfaces, but also a violation of subpart E, means of egress. General requirements also require employees to inspect walking and working surface regularly and correct as needed, repair, or guard against hazardous conditions. This is another addition to subpart D that may be new to you if you are following the old standard. And you can see in our picture down here where the ladder extends into the walkway. People may walk into it when they're going to the cooler. And in our construction zone, and although this would be repair within a facility, so would not fall under the construction standard, it would fall under general industry, we have a housekeeping issue here, and certainly our tripping hazards are not. So we've covered the general requirements for walking and working surfaces, And now we'll get into general requirements for ladders. Ladder rungs need to be not less than 10 inches and not more than 14 inches apart. That is the step distance. Step ladders, such as pictured here, should be no higher than 20 feet, as well as a step ladder such as this needs to have a locking device in place when it's in the expanded position. And the minimum width for the ladder is 11.5 inches, where the minimum width for a step stool is 10. So ladders are not to be loaded beyond their maximum intended load, and this includes the weight of the person getting on the ladder, as well as the tools and equipment which may be carried upon the ladder. That would be the maximum load, and the ladder should not be loaded over its maximum load. So if the ladder's weight was 250 pounds and you had a 250-pound worker, you were probably overloading it because that 250-pound worker could be carrying a piece of equipment when they were going up the ladder, or maybe in heavy clothing in inclement weather. So there are two different types of ladders. There's standing ladders and climbing ladders. Standing ladders tend to have flat rungs so that your foot can rest on it comfortably and it will not become fatigued when you're standing on it for long periods of time. Whereas a climbing ladder has round rungs, so it's comfortable for your hands to grasp onto it when you're climbing. Ladders should only be used on stable surfaces unless they're secured or they have special stabilizing legs on the bottom of them. They should not be placed on boxes or barrels or cement blocks, cinder blocks, or unstable bases. And no ladder should, of course, be moved or shifted or extended up or down while people are upon the ladder. Ladders are only to be used for the purpose for which they were designed. This is an example of an improper use of a ladder because the spreader bar, which keeps it in place, is not completely engaged. Ladders need to be inspected before every use to make sure of their structural integrity. And if there is a broken part to the ladder, you would tag it and take it out of service immediately until it was repaired, if it was able to be repaired at all. Ladders should not be placed in locations such as passageways or doorways where they can be displaced, knocked over by traffic, whether that's a fork truck piece of traffic or vehicle traffic, such as somebody opening a door. If you need to place a ladder there for repair purposes, so you're fixing something that's in front of a door, you should guard the area with some type of temporary barrier, such as you see here. And this is a reminder for people not to walk into that area. Ladders, such as this extension ladder, that are used to gain access to an upper surface, such as a roof edge, need to have the side rails extending at least 3 feet above the upper surface. So this is an example of where the ladder is not extending above the upper surface, and it can absolutely slip out from underneath the individual who is on it, even though somebody's trying to support it from the surface below. This is a really dangerous situation to be in. Is this proper use of ladders? No. Is this proper use of ladders? Well, you can see in the picture here, the worker is trying to secure the ladder to a rain gutter, but typically rain gutters are not able to support the amount of weight that would incur or the forces if that ladder had fallen backwards with a worker on it. So although they are securing it, it is not secured to something that is anchored appropriately. This is an example of a ladder securing device so that the ladder won't move side to side, and it's secured to a balcony edge or a guardrail. This may be appropriate if the balcony is secure enough to support the weight of the ladder and the dynamic load that it would incur when somebody's falling. Here is an example of where a worker had put a 2x4 down in place and put a 3/8 eye screw into the 2x4 and then tied a rope to the eye bolt in the ladder. So this would be an example of where the ladder was secured well to the roof edge and you can see it is extending above the roof edge surface. And this is an example of a spreader bar or a stabilizing device that can be used when you're working high up in the air, and it helps the ladder from moving side to side, and it also enables this person to get close to the windows in which they're working. So there is lots of different kinds of devices that can be used to stabilize a ladder once people get above 4 feet in the air. So as a review question, how many feet should a metal ladder extend over an edge for stability? And the answer is 3 feet. We've moved from portable ladders to fixed ladders. Fixed ladders need to be able to support the maximum weight in which it is intended to support. So again, that's the weight of the person plus the tools and equipment for which they would be using when they were climbing the ladder. The top of the cage needs to be at least 7 feet from the floor surface, and that's so people don't bump into it when they're walking underneath the cage. And rails need to again extend at least 42 inches above the level in which people are accessing. The space between the rungs can be between 10 and 14 inches, and the side rails, so that would be the left to right distance, at its narrowest are 24 inches and its widest are 30 inches. Ladder cages, such as pictured here, are being phased out, and so the new rule says that if a cage is in place, it cannot be used for fall protection, and you need to have a fall protection system in place when people are climbing over 24 feet. You can keep the cage there, but the new requirement says that you have to provide a fall protection system for people that are climbing on fixed ladders. And that's because a cage such as this does very little to stop someone from falling. They do fall into the cage, but they're likely to fall through the cage or be very severely injured when they are falling. The new requirement as of November 2018, that is all ladders that are fixed that are installed after November of 2018 that are greater than 24 inches in height, need to have a ladder safety system in place, and this ladder safety system will be required on all ladders, so that's even ladders that were installed in 1988 in 2036. So you have to retrofit your existing ladders or all new ladders above 24 inches, and that's the top of the ladder to the ground, must have a ladder safety system in place. And you'll find information on this specific criteria in 1910.28 and 29. And this picture is an example of a ladder safety system, so that when the person falls, the system will lock and the person will only fall 2 or 3 inches before the system will stop them from falling the complete distance and down the ladder. Again, cages are being phased out. You can leave them in place, but you'll have to provide a ladder safety system after 2036 or for all new installations after November of 2018. So we've gone from portable ladders to fixed ladders, and now step bolts, which are pictured here, or manhole steps. Manhole steps are uniformly spaced between 12 and 18 inches apart. That's this distance here. They need to be 4.5 inches or greater in width, and the clearance behind is a 7-inch clearance. So if they were installed before January of 2017, the standard states that they're capable of supporting the maximum intended load, which is again the worker and any equipment in which they would be carrying. Anything installed after January of 2017 needs to support 4 times the maximum intended load, as well as any new installations after January of 2017 They need to be coated or constructed so that if they're in a corrosive environment, such as concrete can break down over a period of time, that this corrosiveness of the material needs to be coated to prevent corrosion. So we've moved from ladders to stairways. 1910.25, you need to have at least 6 feet 8 inches between the leading edge of the tread and an overhead clearance. That's so people don't bump their head when they're walking up the stairs. They shouldn't have to duck. As in this picture, there is not at least 80 inches of clearance. The riser height, so that's how high you lift your foot when you walk from one step to the next. The maximum height is 9.5 inches. The minimum depth, so that's how deep the stair is 9.5 inches, and the minimum width is 22 inches. And you need to have at least 30 inches of depth on every landing, so you have enough for people to step up and stop and possibly turn a corner. And so although the next slide covers open-sided edges, I want you to understand that a stairway can also be an open-sided edge if it doesn't have a stair rail or a handrail, and needs to be guarded anytime it is more than 4 feet above the ground. So are these examples of unguarded edges that are more than 4 feet above the ground? Certainly, this roof is an example of an unguarded edge, as well as the distance in which you'd fall because the guardrail is not secured appropriately in place. Surfaces over 4 feet high, whether it's a platform or a stairway, need to be guarded, or anytime you have 3 stairs or 3 treads, that also needs to be guarded. So it's either 4 feet, you need to guard it with a hand or guardrail, or if you have 3 steps or more, it needs to be guarded. And so the requirements for this are the top rail is 42 inches above the surface, and that's plus or minus 3 inches, so it's 39 to 45 inches. Your mid-rail is at 21 inches, ensuring that there's no more than 19 inches of opening between either the ground and the mid-rail or the mid-rail and the top rail, and that a static load, which means somebody leaning into the top rail, that guardrail or that top rail needs to be able to withstand at least 200 pounds of force. To explain a little bit about the guardrail, handrail standard, a stair rail is on the open side of a stair, where a handrail is on the closed side of a stair. And the standard says that this rail needs to be 42 inches high, again, plus or minus 3 inches. And that's because 99% of the population is shorter than 6 foot, 6 inches tall, and therefore their center of gravity will be below this top rail, and they're not likely to accidentally topple over the rail. So that's where the specific anthropometric measurements come into place when dealing with stair rails and handrails. So here we have an example of a stairway which is open on both sides, no stair rails or handrails. So this would be an example of being not in compliance. And then we have a picture of a stairway that is greater than 88 inches wide, and the requirement is that you have a rail down the middle for people to use, because you can't easily grab onto a rail if it's too far away from you in case you were going to fall. So an example of being in compliant and not in compliant. So a slight change in the new rules for mobile work stands. The stair rules apply. You need to have a stair rail, as well as you would have to have a guardrail on the top surface here if it's greater than 4 feet above the ground. And that would be the top rail at 42 inches plus or minus 3, the mid rail there in about 21 inches, and then you have a toe guard at the bottom, which is 4 inches high so that tools don't fall down below. The new requirement says that you can't use change. This has to actually be hard-sided. And I think it makes sense from a momentum standpoint that if you accidentally fall into a chain, you can still flip over it and fall down to the ground, especially because you can see this chain is sagging down. It isn't actually at 42 inches there at all. So I wanted to have a little definition here of what a hole means: a gap or open surface in the floor or horizontal work surface which is at least 2 inches big in diameter. So this is an example of a hole. It's bigger than 2 inches diameter, and a situation in which somebody can fall through to a lower level. So skylights need to be protected either temporarily with barriers while people are up there, or permanently, as you see here, with a cage system on top of the skylight. So we moved forward from stairways to dock boards. Dock boards are used to bridge the gap between the loading dock and the truck. They can be dangerous because they're heavy, and if they're not put in place appropriately, the person or the industrial truck going on to the dock board can fall off, or the dock board itself can fall off. So they need to be anchored in place somehow to prevent movement, and that's why this one has a safety pin on it. And vehicles on dock boards should secure their wheels with wheel chocks so that it doesn't move and kick the dock board out of place. They should be equipped with handles to permit safe handling so you don't get your fingers caught underneath them. And the new standard that came into play in 2017 is that your dock boards need to have an edge on them to prevent a vehicle from rolling off of them. Scaffolding was in the old part of 29 CFR 1910 subpart D, but now it has been removed. And if you need to reference scaffolding, you need to go to 29 CFR 1910-26, which is the construction standard. So all of scaffolding will be has been moved from walking and working surfaces to the construction standard. Although this is an example of scaffolding which doesn't have the top rail on it, so this is an example of scaffolding which is not being used appropriately, or wasn't set up appropriately, is more accurate. So rope descent systems. Rope descent systems are used when people are working on surfaces where you can't use a ladder, you can't use scaffolding. For example, if you have a tall building, 4 or 5 stories, and people need to wash windows, as you would see here in the picture, then that's considered a rope descent system. And before use, the building owner must, in writing, test, certify, and maintain each anchorage point so that it is capable of supporting at least 5,000 pounds. This is a change to the standard, as well as that you need an annual inspection and a 10-year certification by a secondary entity to ensure that that anchorage point has not worn out over time. People can only use rope descent systems under the direction of a qualified person, and training for people who are using rope descent systems is part of 1910.30. So it's subpart D, it's part of this standard, but it's later on in the standard that discusses the training required. Also for rope descent systems, you have to have some kind of anchorage point. Usually it's anchored to the person or what they're descending on. For tools, rope descent systems shouldn't be used in hazardous conditions such as high wind. And if you have a sharp edge for which the rope would go over from your building, you need to provide something so that it pads the edge so the ropes don't rub, and be sure that there's no hazardous chemicals or open flame or other types of substances or conditions which can be destructive to the rope itself. So this is 1910.27 rope descent systems. So for our knowledge check, can you list 3 requirements to consider with the use of either a dock board or a rope descent system? So some possible answers for dock boards: they should have a guarded edge, carrying handles, pins to secure it in place, and vehicles would need to check their wheels when they're on a dock board. For a rope descent system, they can't be used for distances of greater than 300 feet. Require every year to have or to be inspected every year, the 5,000-pound anchorage point, and to be certified every 10 years. 1910.28 is not covered in great detail here, but I wanted to give you a brief overview of it because you do have a duty as an employer to have fall protection and fall object protection in place for people. Employers need to protect workers from falls by choosing from a wide range of protectable fall protection systems, including personal fall protection systems, eliminating the hazards by using guardrails as a primary method, and this particular standard gives you flexibility to determine which particular work method will work best for you. So in areas that are temporary or infrequent, you can use distance as a mean from protecting people from falls. You can also use guardrails, safety nets, or other fall protection equipment that can be put into place that best meets the need. So if you have a roof for which people need to go up onto to provide repair services, please be sure to make sure that your roof has protections in place for it and reference this part of the standard. So some examples here to take a look at. We have an example here of a worker who's sitting on the top of a fuselage for an FA-18. He is certainly more than 4 feet above the ground, and we have absolutely no fall protection in place for him. Here we have an example of a work stand that really is designed well. It marries itself to the aircraft so that there's no gap for a worker to fall between. There are handrails on the stairs that can be used when you're climbing up, as well as a guardrail completely around the platform surface so workers cannot fall or aren't at risk of falling. Some other examples of what we call passive fall protection, and passive fall protection in some instances can be the best because it requires no worker action or no additional worker training. You don't have to have personal protective equipment. You're eliminating the chance for somebody to fall. So here is an example of a wraparound work platform. All these fingers come out and extend onto the helicopter where people have to go from the work stand onto the helicopter. So it bridges that gap there so people can't fall below. And you can see the guardrail here, as well as a custom-built guardrail system that was lifted up by a crane and put in place on top of the helicopter. And this has a guardrail that went all the way around so that workers have no chance of falling. Custom systems. And then here's an example of a man lift. So it has a ladder on it. That's how you access the man lift. And the swing gate right here is missing from there. There should be some means to prevent people from stepping off into space. Some strategies to avoid injuries. Clean up spills immediately or report them. Put a cone out so that people don't lose traction. Use wet floor signs and keep them dry if possible. Another example when people are cleaning floors is to clean one side at a time so that people always have a dry surface to walk upon. And you can use non-slip coatings on floors in kitchens and bathing areas if you happen to be in a nursing home. That would prevent people from, or doesn't actually prevent people from falling, but non-slip coating provides additional traction or friction. The right shoes for the job, sturdy shoes, that can be a policy in your workplace, as well as encouraging people to use handrails on stairs, and of course never using corridors or aisleways for secondary storage so there's not things in place for people to trip over. Keeping electrical cords out of the walkway and off to the side if you need to use them. And then again, that quick repair or maintenance of damaged floor, carpeting, or material. Cleaning snow out of the way, using well-lit areas. These are all good strategies to prevent injuries in the workplace. Always use your ladder as it was intended. Was it an extension ladder or a step ladder? Tie-off ladders that have long runs to them. So if they're 60 feet high, you want to tie that off so it doesn't slip out of place. Inspect them regularly and tag them out if damaged. And ensure that when you're using a step ladder such as this with the A-frame, that spreader bar is completely stretched out. So I have some review questions here. Let's see if you can fill in the blanks. So there are some importances of employees' awareness and how to take the appropriate actions. So our answers are: we'd like to keep all work areas clean and dry, aisles and passageways clear, keep exits free from clutter, spills need to be cleaned up immediately, and use signs or elevated mats in wet areas. So employee involvement is also important, part of ongoing training and reminders to remind people of the hazards found within your facility, to have some kind of method in place so that they can report them or take action themselves, and of course, be a good role model, not taking shortcuts, and cleaning up spills as they occur, as well as wearing the appropriate shoeing given the weather conditions.